Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. MinnMax is a place about games, friends, and getting better. My name is Ben Hansen. Thank you for clicking on this. Thank you for being here. Today's interview is with somebody who I've followed for a very long time, not in person like anything creepy, just online in a somewhat creepy way. This is Patrick Klepek, who has been in the game industry for a very long time. He's not an old man, but he got his start in 1997. Writing about games, and from there he was at 1UP/EGM for a while, MTV News, Giant Bomb, you might know him from, Kotaku, he was there for a while, and then Vice with Waypoint. And we learned recently that Waypoint is sadly shutting down on June 2nd, and Vice is also filing for bankruptcy. So this interview is kind of a nice time and place with Patrick where he's talking about his career and the future of games media. And also, maybe most importantly, what he would like to do, how he's feeling, what he would like from his future. So if you are interested in Patrick Klepek's full journey, or you just want to learn more about what it's like behind the scenes writing about video games for decades now, it's a wild concept. We hope you enjoy this interview with Patrick Klepek. There are time codes for your convenience below, so hope you enjoy those as well. We hope you enjoy everything. If you do enjoy this interview, we'd appreciate it if you subscribe to MinnMax's YouTube channel. Little click for you, huge thing for us. And then also we have the podcast version of this interview, all of our other interviews available right in your favorite podcast app. If you go to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's, jump in there, you unlock a ton of stuff in that bonus podcast feed. That's how an independent operation like MinnMax is able to be sustainable. But without further ado, here's Patrick Klepek. Patrick Klepek, welcome to MinnMax. Hello. Thank you for being here.
This is a back-to-back.
I know
we're a Giant Bomb together, and now we're on your channel. If my website wasn't going away, I'd turn it into a hat trick and invite you on something that we're doing. But by the time I would have a chance to do that, I will be locked out of my email account probably.
And you laugh back. This is what? Okay,
what am I supposed to do in the face of my severance might not actually go through, Ben? Like this.
Wait,
this.
Really? That's a thing?
My company went into bankruptcy after laying us off.
I don't know the first thing of how that works, and that just means severance is they're flipping a coin.
So we were laid off as part of a kind of a mass layoff, but we were extended. Like technically, my final day is June 2nd, but I was informed that my position was terminated, 5 weeks ago or something like that. My understanding, this is reading a little between the lines, we were added to the list to be laid off extremely late because when we got I woke up, took my kids to school, worked out, showered, and I'm like sitting down, cooling off. I get 3 back-to-back very concerning emails that are like the future of Vice. What's happening at Vice? It's like, oh no, those are like off emails. And on one hand, I got those emails because if you don't have a job anymore, if you might be part of that first wave, you just might be disconnected from. And so, okay, is this a good sign? Is this a good sign? Am I going to be able to stay here? Do I survive yet another axe? Because that has come through Vice, like many media companies. Yeah. Every couple of years that happens. And so I get a message from my immediate boss. Hey, your team's good. Our team is good. We're going to be on a lot of sad calls today, but you can at least breathe easy and we'll talk about what the future means after that. 45. So I tell my wife, I tell my team, 45 minutes later, I get an email that says your position has been terminated. That's a little curious. So I messaged my same boss. I'm like, hey, I appear to have lost my job. And so has the rest of my team, my immediate team, Router Price, Rob Zachney, Ricardo Contreras. And well, that's not what we were told. We're going to go make some calls. And it sounds like we were just added at the last second for whatever reason. Maybe someday over drinks, I will know more about what exactly happened there. But I do think it being where they told us we had a job and then we didn't. I think I was supposed to lose my job 5 weeks ago. And then they went, oh, we kind of fucked this up. We kind of messed this up. And then we got until June 2nd. And what's crucial about this potential mistake, or if it was planned all along, is that the company went into bankruptcy after it had laid off a bunch of people. And so I was informed that I was losing my job, but had not lost my job yet. And the way money is spent, structured, looked at by the court is different if you are laid off pre-bankruptcy and post-bankruptcy. Pre-bankruptcy, this is my understanding based on our union lawyer, is that like your money is now owned by the courts, has to be spent by the courts, has to be approved by the courts. Post-bankruptcy, if you lay somebody off, like you can give them their full severance right away. Otherwise, I don't know, people are dealing with like lump sums, caps on their severance. So I've been told this should be fine.
Okay.
But it's like how's I describing it on a recent podcast? It was like a soft 95%. You know, like the 5% of wiggle room that that maybe it doesn't work out, which is why YouTube TV got canceled a couple of weeks ago, and my wife and I are all crucial. You know, you got a kid coming up, and watching Netflix is not a thing quite yet, but we were able to switch Netflix to the ad tier because the ads don't get serviced for the kids' content, and so
shrewd.
Netflix is primarily for us like something for the kids to watch, just whatever garbage they put up there. But they don't get served ads, and I pay less per month. So these are the belt tightening things that I'm doing as I figure out what exactly is my financial situation in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, are you sick of people asking how you feeling?
I mean, no, okay. It means people care. It's a reminder that folks have enjoyed the work we have done at Waypoint for the past 6 years. It's a reminder that the work I've done personally has meant something to whether it's colleagues or folks that read, listen, watch the various things that I have done here at places before. So no, in some ways it's like, oh, people care and you're still relevant. And those are important metrics for things like finding a job or asking people to spend money on potential future endeavors. And so, you know, but my wife did we were hanging out last night because as we're recording this, I'm officially 1 week out from the last day. So the fact that we got laid off and had 6 more weeks has made this feel very surreal, like kind of hard to take it fully seriously because it's like, well, I've lost my job, but I also kind of still have to do podcasts.
Well, that's the thing. The tone from everybody is like, yeah, we're going to be doing stuff. We're not going to be busting our asses.
We're mostly doing it as obligation to a sense of obligation to the audience.
Right.
Like, we have a different, we ended up in a business model. It's like I left Giant Bomb, which was like doing a subscription model within a company. And then it was like Kotaku for a year, and then went to Waypoint, which is a traditional website for like 4 years. And then for the last 2 years, I just ended up back where I started with Giant Bomb, which is like doing a subscription model within a company. And that part is a little odd because it's just a weird pitch to make to people of like, do you want to pay for a thing, even though I'm already getting a salary paid and it's different. But anyway, it's all just to say we felt an obligation to the audience to do certain things, to try and like do one more episode of like different reoccurring series. And frankly, depending on where all of us land and in what ways, like want to tell people where we're going to be, like what are the next steps if you want to follow what we're doing, where are those things? And it's a group of people I still like talking to. So it has been, but there has been a weird part because I have been, doing a lot of work to take next steps, whether it's doing interviews or like informal conversations, like trying to figure out, is this the end of the road for me as a writer and a reporter? Because what I can say now, like very frankly, is like I have no offer on the table to go from Waypoint to go be a reporter anywhere else. There have been a couple of things. Huh?
Were you hunting for one?
I mean, I'll say like the fact that I've got a couple of months severance, I have been trying to internalize. My wife has been reminding me of this. Like, it has always worked out. You will find or figure out something. You're always working and stressed about it. It's also okay to just step back and enjoy it a little bit. I've done the exact opposite of that for the last 4 weeks. Because I'm just not built that way. I got to figure out what the next thing is.
Yeah.
Especially with 2 kids, putting away money for college. Like, there's just too much on the table that I haven't been able to just kind of enjoy the moment. But I am treating it as an opportunity to try some new things. It's like, okay, when you've got the backdrop of a soft 95% guaranteed severance, that maybe it's an opportunity to throw a couple darts at the wall. And when I get really anxious, none of that works, or it's not adding up in the way that I need it to sort of sustain the life that we've got for my family, then okay, am I like more seriously looking at like going into consulting,
right?
Or like getting into communications or doing like an in-house. Like there was one role that I was talking with a company about where it's almost like a full-time in-house consultant role. You're like doing trend analysis and like stuff like that. I mean, sort of things that would like a skill set of stuff I've done before would then transfer to, a video game developer which then would put me on a road to probably not come back to reporting again, but to apply some of those skills in a different track.
Did you talk much with Austin? Did he have good advice, or just did seeing his transition kind of make you feel one way or the other versus like, maybe I could go for the full development side and flip the
It's
table?
tough because I don't have the creative bones that Austin does. And so Austin's path where he, right after we launched Waypoint Plus with him, got just an incredible offer to go work at Possibility Space and really stretch these design muscles that if anyone's listened to Friends at the Table or the way that Austin approaches criticism, like sometimes you can see in people's writing, the way they talk about games, you could see a very natural transition to a designer. I just don't think about games that way. My brain is not really structured that way. And so, I guess never say never, but it's been hard. Like I've had some folks reach out to me, game developers that used to be like writers, like, hey, like I got into games writing. Like, you probably could do like dialogue. And I was like, I don't know that I could. Like, I just don't feel, one, I don't feel the pull.
Sure.
And two, I just don't know that I have that kind of skill set. My writing has never leaned. All writing is creative, like finding stories, crafting stories, a lot of like reporting and features that are kind of the centerpiece of what I've done as a writer in my career. There are creative elements to that, but I've never left that and gone, well, now I want to write a screenplay or write characters. Like I really struggle to like do D&D style stuff or like come up with a character. I was like, I don't know. Can you just tell me who I should be?
His name is Aragorn. He's really cool.
And so the development stuff for me, one, just I've done this for so long. Like I've done it for half my life. I'm 38. I got seriously into writing around 14 years old. That was the first E3 that I went to in Atlanta in 1998. So I was doing some game stuff, some writing stuff before that. But I sort of consider E3 1998 as sort of my formal entry into the industry in a way. Because this is where I met people like Brad. I met Brad Shoemaker for the first time. Him and I became friends through an IRC channel called Vid Games, which is where a lot of old EGM people hung out. And that's where Brad, also known as Ruds, I believe I'm pronouncing his acronym correctly, is where we first met. And I have like a distinct memory of going to E3 with my dad and pulling up to a Duke Nukem Forever like stand or whatever they were showing the game and meeting Brad for the first time. And that was 14 years ago, and his voice was as gravelly as it is now. And that was, of course, the first thing because we never talked before because there was it was all text channel stuff. And so that was truly my first time understanding who is Brad Shoemaker.
But you like set that up like a little meet cute thing of like, hey, I'll meet you by Duke Nukem. Let's finally meet in person. Or was it just you found him? You're like, oh, this is Brad from the IRC channel.
I can't remember what actually led to that one. But there was like a channel meetup. So I did, and my dad went to that and like met a bunch of the. It's a responsible thing to do. I mean, I think parents knowing that their kids have an internet life and have communications with people that are like that they know on the internet and have genuine friends that exist on the internet. That is more normalized now, especially because like you and I went through that world. So now we're of a generation in which the parents understand what it means to have internet life. That did not exist in 1998. And so I can imagine it's actually wild that my parents let me get away with as much as they did. I'm kind of shocked by it because it sounds so sketchy. It's like, so I'm on this online chat room. A bunch of older men want me to meet with them at a hotel room. Okay, Dad, like, does that sound cool? And he went with me. It turns out those people were cool, and it all worked out.
Yeah. That's bizarre. Okay, we could jump into 1,000 different places. It seems like the most pressing thing is you seem to be hinting that you want to keep the team together at some point from Waypoint.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of exploring what that could mean. I know a lot of folks in my position, if they've not gone to development, have kind of gotten the band back together through a Patreon or something like that. That has always scared me because it is just a different, and well, you know this, it is a different financial proposition to go from there are lots of tiny and big things that a company does for you, even a company that you may not be happy at necessarily, that is taken care of for you. There's invisible money that is taken care of that is not part of your salary, like things like insurance. And so it's not even as simple as like, can I raise enough money to match my salary? It's like, can I raise enough money to match my salary and expenses and like all these other hidden costs that become very present. And so I am just a very, not politically, I'm not conservative, but my personal life, my wife and I are like deeply conservative. And so it's like very difficult for me to wrap my head around. And now I'm just going to go from a stable paycheck that was backed by a union to hoping I can produce enough content that people like and want to subscribe to. And so I think there is like a future, like, you know, things like the sports podcast that Rob and I do. Like there are things that I want to continue exploring. I have, but the idea that like Waypoint will just glob onto crowdfunding and continue as it was before, like whatever the future holds, it is something fundamentally different than it was before. And partially is because I don't want to give up writing and reporting, and crowdfunding really does not lend itself to, like, you need a lawyer to do certain kinds of stories. You know, if I'm going to like pieces like I did at Waypoint, where I'm like doing a big investigative piece on like Unity and their interactions with military contracts, I don't know that I'm going to publish that all by myself. I would, you know, so it's like, maybe that's a piece that I'm partnering with, you know, a Polygon or some other outlet. And then the other thing I've been sort of building over these last couple of weeks, where we kind of wound down a lot of our day-to-day work at Waypoint, has been, you know, I'm a parent of 2 kids. I got a kid who's almost 7, a kid who just turned 3, both girls. And the oldest is like deeply into games at different levels, more of like the Roblox and Minecraft variety than all, you know, playing Marios and Zeldas. But games are clearly so normalized that they're going to be a huge part of her life. And I struggled to find ways to talk about that at Waypoint. No one else has kids. And so I wanted to see if there was a world where I could establish a community where I could sort of like gather together like-minded folks that are experiencing those same problems together. And so one of the things that I am launching, I guess this is coming out on a Monday, on Friday, June 2nd, is a thing called Crossplay. It's right like crossplay.news or patrickklepek.substack.com. And the whole pitch that I have is sort of like a newsletter at the intersection of parenting and video games. It's like be very much focused on not just what it's like to be a parent who's playing video games and how you're dealing with things like screen time, like cyberbullying, parental controls, games that are like age appropriate, but also like what does it mean to be a parent, and like how do you still play video games? Or, you know, I've got an interview lined up with a game developer who's been a single parent making games for decades. Like, how have they handled being a single parent, like working on video games, which are notorious for crunch and all sorts of other things? Like, those are the kinds of stories I want to explore, and I wanted to put that in a box in one place. And on Friday, June 2nd, I will find out if financially like that is possible. Can I find enough people who want to pay money to read that regularly? I don't know.
And Substack,
but that's something I want to find out.
It was always Substack. You weren't thinking Patreon even for that, of like, well, let's just see how this type of thing would do on Patreon. Then maybe we could evolve it to have some videos and podcasts and stuff.
Yeah. Substack ended up where I landed because Patreon seems to be broadly more video and audio focused. Like that is a lot of what people are the kind of creating. And that's not exclusive. There are people who are, you know, artists that are doing all sorts of things on Patreon. But how many times have you gone to Patreon to read an article?
Yeah.
But not happens, right?
It
like
doesn't,
people publish like their content schedules and things like that. Like it's not a place where people go to read writing. It's also not a place where people are sharing links to writing that has been written there. And Substack, for all its problems, being like, we love right-wing writers and centrists, and we're going to pay them a bunch of money to come here. They've got a great CMS. They have like a growing progressive wing, and it's a lot of people who want to support, read, and pay for writing. And like that is fundamentally what Crossplay is about. It may have I'd love for it to have a podcast eventually. I've thought like I'd love to have a mom and a dad. Like, I'm the dad. Can I find a mom that like wants to podcast about things? Like maybe it'll justify the effort to put that in. But Substack has a lot of natural network effects and built-in elements that support writing and people wanting to pay for that writing. And so that seemed to be like a really natural place for that to live, because that's the kind of place where people want to go to actually read things. And that just didn't strike me as what is happening on places like Patreon or Memberful or these other services.
Yeah. I know you can't go too much into specifics about any specific plans you may or may not have, but that idea of like, well, we'd like to do something Waypoint-ish and keep the crew together to some extent, but not fully go into the Patreon model because we don't trust it and I don't think there's enough for everybody there. Like, does that just mean angel investors? Like, are you at that level of like knocking on doors to find another big home for this, or you want to be fully independent? What's the strategy if you're not?
I have no idea. That'll kind of depend on like a number of factors, like some of which for like legal reasons I can't talk about, and other reasons for like practical reasons, like I'm just not ready to talk about. But I think part of what we're thinking about, what would come next is we were able to wind down certain obligations to the audience, but like my severance is different than other people's severances, right? Like I've been there for almost 7 years, and so everyone's financial situations are different. And there's like, is there a world where some of this stuff can continue to kind of wind down obligations to the Waypoint audience, and also to give some of my coworkers a little more cushion as they figure out what exactly they want to do next. And so those are kind of hurdles and conversations we need to have, and hopefully that'll get formalized in the times to come. But I mean, that's the benefit of well, again, if the severance comes through, giving space for people to figure out. The thing that's also worth considering, and something that I have thought a lot about, is sometimes things just come to an end. And that 6 years, almost 7 years, was a long run. We got to do a lot of really interesting work, got to have a lot of really interesting conversations. And when I was younger, I kind of became notorious for like, like Patrick stays at a place for 2-3 years, then moves on to something else. And it's because it was a combination of the vibes are bad at the place I'm at, and also it was the fastest way to get like paid more and to do something different, right? Like what I was doing at a G4 was different than what I was doing at an EGM. What I was doing at EGM was different than what I was doing at Giant Bomb. What I was doing at Giant Bomb was different than what I was doing at Kotaku. What I was doing at Kotaku was different. And like I've always been often changed places because I wanted to try something new. It's been important in my ability to continue having a job, is the ability to start as a writer and a reporter, but also learn how do I do video, how to do audio, how do I fit within the ways that coverage is changing. And so when, a layoff comes to your door, the impulse might be, let's just keep doing what we're doing.
Right.
But I also feel the draw, even though, I'm a little older and have different obligations personally, maybe this is just the end of the road for this. That can be okay. Like things can come to an end, and you can be proud of the work you did in those years. And maybe that's an opportunity to shuffle the deck and do something different. I've liked doing writing and reporting, but if the signs at the door are that, hey, for where you're at in your life, the kind of money you want to make, there just aren't that many chairs for you to sit down at. And if those chairs just aren't available right now, my obligation is to not to continue being like this close eye for the industry. Like there's other people who are doing that. Like, and I think there will continue to be people who do that work. And it's okay if I need to say goodbye to that and find some other way to contribute and be happy.
Yeah. Do you feel, I know this is too big of a question, but do you feel satisfied with your career? Do you feel to some extent like I've done pretty much all I want to do, so if I have to shake things up in a big way at this point, it's not the end of the world?
Yeah, I think so. I think I have a really good legacy of work that I'm incredibly proud of. I mean, I think the thing that I've struggled with ever since I got to Giant Bomb was that I have managed to, I think, more or less successfully adapt to the personality world, which was not what I went to school for. It's not what I got into this job to do in the first place. I got into like tell interesting stories, write interesting stories, report interesting stories. I didn't get into this to make sure people like me, and that they would want to pay to like see things and that I read or say or do on camera. And I think I've done a pretty good job of being good at those things and being able to cultivate an audience that is interested in those things. But I cannot help but admit, like, it is less satisfying to me personally. Like the writing, like when I do the best possible podcast for Waypoint, is infinitely less satisfying to me than the equal article that I can write. And that is just because at my core, that's where I came from.
But do you think it's also just like feedback? Like you'll probably get a handful of nice tweets, some nice comments on YouTube, maybe of like, this podcast ruled. Maybe you'll get somebody in person and be like, oh, that podcast meant a lot to me, which is great. But if you write a great article, you break some big news, you get that instant just slot machine of seeing it bump around the internet and everybody citing you. I mean, is that a big part of it? Just kind of that validation?
I mean, that feels good.
Yeah.
That certainly does feel good. Like to publish something and watch people talk about something you made, I'm sure is a part of the rush of making games as well. Like I think that there is something about that feeling. The validation is important. It is cool to feel validated after putting in a lot of time and work into something. But no, I don't think that's all of it. I think it's actually more the fundamental creative act of, I had an idea, I go to the work, the words are mine, like, and there's something about that sort of like finished product that just speaks to me, like on some sort of like personal creative level, in the same way that I think, someone like Austin, like when they create a character or tell a story, like people have those pulls in different ways. And in no way is it meant to like look down on the act of like doing a good podcast is extremely hard. Like it is its own creative act, like working within the dynamics of a group or doing a good interview. Like those are all really difficult things. It's just sort of like a hierarchy, like what makes you happy. And it's like that just makes me happier than the other things. And so part of what I'm trying to figure out going forward is like, okay, wrestle with the fact that this part of what just where the culture is going, and also what people want to see you do and will pay for, is maybe not the thing that makes you happiest, but like don't ignore that. Is there a way that like you can do that and do the other thing, and like find a balance between those two worlds? And that's kind of what I'm going to try and figure out over this summer. Like I have 3 months severance, so I've kind of thought about it as this summer of experimentation. I have until the end of August, early September, like it's like Memorial Day to Labor Day. Can you make this new balance of things work? And maybe by the end of that, the economic market has shifted a little bit. Maybe a chair does open up for me and I can just sit back down and do what I was doing before somewhere else. But maybe not. And maybe those other things don't add up in the way I was hoping. And that's fine. But that's what I'm going to try and figure out over the summer is try a couple of new things. And then if those don't work out, then maybe my eye goes to a big different new thing.
I mean, you've had such a wild perspective on the industry. You've jumped around to so many different outlets at this point. Like, where is the sweet spot for happiness? Like, based on what you're saying, it leads me to believe it'd be Kotaku, of just primarily focusing on writing, working with editors, that level? Or do you feel like Waypoint was kind of the culmination of everything for you?
Like early Waypoint was a better mix, right?
Yeah.
Like, because we were doing the podcast, we were doing video stuff, but we had a strong editorial focus. Like, what part of the business directive was write news stories, write features, like, SEO, things like that. And those all come with its own problems and issues. But I was always given broad latitude to sort of write whatever I wanted to write. It was like the greatest gift one could be given was that, we trust that you will find stories that will do traffic. Just go write what you want to write. And the challenges that was sometimes was, it's kind of easier when someone just tells you, could you just like go write 1,000 words about this topic? Right. It might not be your favorite topic, but there is its own pressure of waking up every day. Go find a good story. It's like, can I just write like a mediocre story, but you told me I have to do it and then my editor is happy?
Spider-Man swings onto store shelves September 12th. It's just right there.
There's kind of sometimes, like trying to figure out what is the good story that will also play well to an audience of unknowns. Sometimes it's fine. That's what makes like a review like nice and neat. It's
sure.
Like, you play the game, you write about it.
Yeah.
As opposed to go find some breaking news. All right, I'll try and find it, I suppose.
But then there's that, I'm projecting maybe a little bit, but it's like that feeling of guilt too, of like, well, this is what I wanted, absolute freedom. And I've had those moments at MinnMax too, of like, this is the greatest blessing in the world. Don't blow it. What should I do with it? And just that feeling of like, I don't come up with anything, I'm screwed.
It is 100% like if you were given a blank canvas, the canvas is blank, and then you need to fill it. And sometimes, as Rob Zachney, my colleague at Waypoint would needle me is like, all right, I've come back with a piece. I was like, Patrick, this is 1,800 words about this like speedrunner trying to glitch through this wall. Is like, this is like, yeah, it's really interesting. Is like, is it? Well, it's interesting to me, Rob. And so that's sometimes where you end up when you are given that blank canvas is you can sometimes go down a rabbit hole that is maybe just interesting to you.
But then it's going to connect with at least a handful of people out there, and then they'll stick with you for years and years. And I mean, honestly, and they'll send feedback. Then you probably are drowning in just positive vibes and positive comments ever since the announcement that Waypoint's going away. So it's just like this great payoff of like, oh, all those things that I had a fine time doing, turns out there was an audience out there that was just quieter than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, that is the nature of producing content on the modern internet, right? Is where you have to remind yourself that a mean comment is not representative of the broad reception to your work. Like most people quietly enjoy a thing. Think of it like in your own life. Like if you enjoy something or have a good service interaction, like you don't go tell the person or leave the review. When you look at reviews online, it's because people had a bad time, like broadly speaking. Like people act out in anger or disappointment are less inclined to act out in joy or sort of like quiet acceptance. And so that you're right, it is one of these moments where the death of the impending death of Waypoint is bringing out a lot of people saying a lot of really nice things, and it is a nice validation of the work and the time and the many iterations the website has gone through in its nearly 7 years, that a lot of people, they take enjoying your work for granted, and you take the fact that people enjoy your work for granted. But then you have these dramatic moments where people feel the need to tell you. And I appreciate it. I've always tried to tell people that no matter how seemingly big in an industry people may seem, whether it's like content creators you enjoy or game developers, people like being told that you enjoy their work. And, sometimes it's just getting in and out. Like if you see someone in person, tap them on the shoulder, just thank them for what they do. But like that stuff sits with you. I have still in my bag. I haven't updated them in a while. I should do that with some of the ones people have sent me at Waypoint as this comes to an end. But like I had some complicated ups and downs when I worked at Giant Bomb with the audience. And the way of navigating that was I would print out like some of the really touching and nice letters that people had wrote. And they were just like in this one spot in like my work bag that I would take to events. And I never really read them, but there was just something about like a reminder, like a physical reminder that, okay, like when a bunch of people are like, stop writing politics on the website, which is why I then formed Waypoint. It was like, what if I just only did politics?
Right.
That kind of physical reminder that people enjoy the work, get meaning out of your work. It was nice to kind of have that in like physically near me, even if I never actually like took it out like a weirdo weeping at a bus stop.
It was nothing lasts forever. I'd imagine you went in understanding like, hey, Waypoint seems pretty good, getting out of the gate here. We'll see how it all goes. What was the first sign you think that you had internally of like, oh boy, I'm getting scared?
I mean, it happened a couple different times over the years. One of the most fun things I was ever a part of at Waypoint was one of the first things that we did was I started in August 2016 before we were Vice Gaming. Was it Vice Gaming? Yeah, Vice Gaming's new podcast. That's what Waypoint Radio started as. We didn't have a name. It was just sort of a vertical. And then we were tasked with coming up with a brand and sort of like a value structure. And as part of Waypoint's launch, I mean, Vice spent a ton of money and got a bunch of brand sponsorships for, I think we called it the Waypoint 72. It was 72 straight hours of programming. We had like celebrities coming through, like these hip hop artists that Austin had to explain to me. I was like, who's that? And he was like, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, cool. That's enough information so I can get through the segment with you. And it felt like we were part of something really big and really important, and that the company was really excited. I was like, they put all these resources behind this video game website.
Yeah.
And we never did anything on that scale ever again. So that was the first sort of disappointment was, like they were really excited to launch this thing, put a bunch of resources and money behind it. And then when it wasn't shiny and new, like, on to the next thing.
Were you pushing hard for another event or for basic things that
it
they
was
weren't
more
supplying?
just resources in general,
Okay.
right? Like, it was just difficult to acquire. They wanted us early on, like, to build not quite something on the scale of an IGN or a Polygon, which is sort of like an institutional level gaming website that is trying to cover everything, but moving in that direction. And it was just like we were never given the resources to really do that. Like I was the primary news person, and like one person cannot do that alone. And then over the years, it was just like wild shifts in executives coming and going, which then led to wild shifts in expectations for the website, where like early on we did some streams, but we didn't do a ton of them. And then someone came in who was like, Twitch is the future, do a bunch of streams. We're doing a bunch of streams. And then, wow, your podcasts are the most popular ones at Vice, like do more podcasts. Okay, we're doing more podcasts. New SEO is not as important, like you could do less news stories. Okay, we're doing less. So it was like we never got a clear sense of our goals, whether we were meeting them, not meeting them. And ultimately that led to an era where like we weren't Waypoint, like we were Vice Gaming, and then we were Waypoint, and then they took the Waypoint name away from us. Like the vertical got shuttered, and we were folded over into Motherboard, which was the technology vertical. We were very lucky. The leadership at Motherboard, huge shout outs to Jason Kebler and Emmanuel Myberg. They were not just like our work, but like we're fans. Like Emmanuel has shown me since emails he sent me like 12 years ago of like asking me a question about something when I worked at a different website. Like these are, and people like genuinely understood what our mission was. And like, we could not have landed, they took our name away from us, but could not have landed in a better spot to be, because they understood what we were trying to accomplish. And we're very good at shepherding us through a tumultuous time, ultimately getting us our name back. We never lost it for the podcast. We definitely lost it for the publication for a time, and got that back. And like around that era is when we finally managed to convince the company to launch Waypoint Plus, which even that was an accident, because we'd wanted to do in the biz, they call it a direct to consumer model, which is, just selling some subscriptions. But you got to talk in the parlance when you're pitching it.
That's right.
At a corporate and executive level. We just never could get them to come around to it, even though it's like, look, we are doing these charity streams where we are raising literally like $100,000 to $150,000 for like Trans Lifeline and these other charities. Those people would show up. Like if they're going to do that for a charity, they do it for our content too. Like there's money we're leaving on the table. And it wasn't until Motherboard actually did this weird zine, like printed zine thing where they signed up for Memberful, and that's how they funded it through their readers. And at the end of that, Jason Keller was like, it seems like we could launch Waypoint Plus through this. Figure out a business model, like figure out how you undo the money and the tiers. We're just going to kind of skunk works this and just sort of push it through the company.
Sweet.
And we more or less just kind of like quiet. We eventually informed the company, like there was more of a formal thing at the last second.
Yeah.
But that was kind of just a secret mission. And then the company was informed at the last second, given sort of expectations of what we expected subscribers to go. We had some numbers internally that we were sort of thinking what would be like a low, medium, high level of success. And it exceeded the high one. And that was a blessing and a curse. And ultimately, I think is a great contributor to where we end up now with Waypoint is that the number we hit, because the Waypoint audience has always shown up. They have whenever we have asked something from them, whether it was Waypoint Plus or whether it's the various charity things we've done, they've always shown up. They're an incredibly passionate, thoughtful group of people that has shown up with their time and their money. And so no great shock when we finally asked them to show up with their time and money for something we were doing. They did, and they hit a number that was then blasted out, to Vice all, like, look at what Waypoint did. Like, this is incredible. We have an example of like a top tier direct to consumer product. Like, we're going to be like talking about this to advertisers and yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do any of that. We got like no support structure out of it after that. It was mostly just kind of us operating for 2 years on our own, with like no real growth potential support from the company. but it was the number that we hit became a weight, because I'm sure you're familiar with this. Like, you sort of hit a number, and then that, like, you kind of know what the audience is and what the finance is. And you can push that number up if you're promising new things. But like, broadly speaking on these, and this is what you want, is like, you hit a number, you know what you're making, and then that number kind of ebbs and flows like in the hundreds, like depending on when you're doing sales and things like that. But like, it's the number is kind of what it is.
Yeah.
And like, we hit an orbit of like, that's what the Waypoint audience is. Could we goose that if we asked people like, holy shit, we need your money? Like, yes, we could.
Yeah.
But it would probably eventually filter back down to like this. And it's a good business. It didn't cover everything that like everyone's salaries and yada yada, because that, as I mentioned earlier, like that gets complicated. But it was a good business. It was a profitable business in the spectrum of what Vice wanted. But we couldn't promise them to become like an exponentially grown, like, it's like, do you want a business that's rock steady, is always going to make money, and is highly dependable despite what's happening in the ad market?
Yeah.
We can give that to you, but we can't promise that number go up.
Right.
And eventually that is what killed us, was that we can't promise that number go up. And that is just what these capitalist businesses want. It's what the shareholders want. There's so many tensions pulling at that. And despite that being, quote, like, you built something that people paid for and you make money on it, that is just not enough. And we were just not in a position to be able to promise the company that it would go all that much further.
Did you have a lot of meetings with people being like, hey, tapping at the whiteboard, this number, this is the mission, everybody?
We started having meetings. Like we had a meeting, a little bit of like what some of the pressures we were getting was like, okay, if the number is static, what are other things that you can do within the company that would make money and makes you as a unit look better? And we had been asking for that for years. We are ready to play ball. Would you like us to do some bullshit Doritos sponsored content? And we'll play the new Call of Duty, even though that's not like what Waypoint would normally do, but like you could sell that against, like, you know, the sales team can sell that. I mean, one of the things we would constantly sort of hear was, why don't you play? Like, we wouldn't hear this directly, but it like filter through the grapevine, is like the sales team would go, Activision's ready to spend money. Waypoint, if they even do play Call of Duty, which they broadly don't, they're mostly talking about it as war propaganda.
Right.
So how do we sell that? And one of the things I just wish we had, I wish we'd been put in front of people more often to explain, this is what we do. And also, this is what we're willing to do for you. We would be willing to sell out to a pretty shocking degree
for stuff that we believe in, you know, like
to buttress the like sure. you want me to go do something sponsored by Hardee's, like I'll build content around that. And our audience is smart enough that they can sniff the bullshit. Like, they'll know they're doing this thing, which is a wink and a nod, because that's just the dance you have to do. And we were just never given an opportunity to properly explain ourselves, to do those sorts of things.
That's the part that blows my mind. It's like, that's just a failure of communication in a company this big. If this team is screaming this and this team is screaming this, and just no one's there to be like, and on Thursday at noon, you will meet.
Yeah. And we had some conversations like that this year where, like, felt like we had a real breakthrough with certain leadership in which, like, we're willing to do some of this bullshit, like, to make, like, that makes the future of Waypoint better. It makes the future of the business better. Like, makes us look better in the eyes of folks above us that may not understand, why does this gaming website do a movie podcast? Why are they talking about the Chicago Bears? Like those are legitimate questions. I fully get how it's a weird product to explain.
Right.
Why are they talking about games more? Like, we went through a whole formal, like, process where something was potentially going to happen around E3, and that fell apart before E3 fell apart. But it was the kind of thing where, like, we were working across the company, and it wasn't this, like, we were not building an event for the Waypoint audience. It was building an event for a broader gaming audience, and Waypoint was going to be a part of it. And we were happy to do that, because that is some of the dance you have to do at a company. And it all fell apart because the economy is all busted and the ad market's weird. And then it wouldn't have mattered because E3 fell apart. Yeah. But that was like our one chance at trying to do something like that, and it didn't work out. and then immediately after we were laid off. And there's a different world where I wish we had an opportunity to. It's like, look, like we are people who host things that command really dedicated audiences. We can probably do these other things for you as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even as simple as, Vice had various other initiatives on Twitch, and you can, I don't know how it all works, but like you can kind of like, I don't know, you're paying, you can get on the front page somehow.
Sure.
Somehow you can get featured on the front page. And those are a lot of fake numbers. When you see like a place, anything put on the front page of Twitch is going to inorganically get tens of thousands of people to watch because it's just the front page. And the moment that faucet is turned off, a lot of those people are going to leave. But some people might stay. And that's the whole reason you want to be plastered there is like, can you get exposed to a different audience and maybe they'll be surprised at what they're doing. And Vice did that for a lot of other parts of the company. A single time could we get them to do it for us.
So bizarre.
And it seemed like the kind of thing where if we could just do this a handful of times, maybe we could scrape off some new people. Maybe we can get on that trajectory that the company would want. It's just like we never could get the support to get any of those switches to get flipped. And it's disappointing because it was nice to have that bubble within the corporate structure, but this also exposes all the problems of having that bubble in the corporate structure when you're as weird as some of the things that we were doing relative to expectations of what they wanted from a video game website.
Right. Number one question. What was that Waypoint Plus subs number? What was the number that they were happy with out of the gate? Why not say? What's the downside?
I think it's always like, I guess I don't. We were so private about it at Waypoint. And so I guess like it was like roughly it went between 5,000 and 6,000.
Okay.
Right. And like,
perfect. Yeah.
And that is kind of the number that we had for the audience. And that worked out very well for us.
Yeah.
And obviously that's different than the podcast numbers. Like that's the kind of subscription numbers. Yeah, I mean, that kind of shows you like the world we were working in.
Yeah.
And, Vice wanted that number to have zeros after it.
Right.
And like, that can be a challenge.
That seems like a sustainable Patreon number. I'm just going to throw out there.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
Okay.
We're having. Yeah. We'll see where it all ends up. But I mean, you're right. I mean, like, look, the long and short of it is that it was a good business. And we proved that out. And that is just not enough I mean, look what, happened with the Nextlander folks, spinning out a giant bomb. I know I was there for a number of years. I was there. It's, when we got bought by CDS, like the same pressures and disappointments that I saw at CBS were the same pressures and disappointments that I saw within Vice.
Right.
In which they just don't quite know what to do. They're very excited to say like we're selling something to consumers that isn't merch. And that's a very other funny thing. But they started selling Waypoint merch, but they didn't consult us. Like Waypoint has merch.
Okay.
But then Vice started selling Waypoint merch. They did like their own designs, and they just showed up on a website one day and were charging like $100 for a sweatshirt. I think I could say this now. Is like we never really pointed people toward it because we weren't a huge fan of the designs. And it was like no fault of any of the people who were involved in.
Sure.
Something just didn't happen along the way where we were communicated with. So like folks who were, I'm like not trying to disparage folks who like worked on that product or those designs.
Sure.
They just really weren't in line with the aesthetic of the stuff we did. And so I don't even know if they're still up anymore, if that whole merch thing continued. But as a like pseudo apology, I was like, you need to send me one of those. I'm not paying $100 for that sweatshirt. And so I have it upstairs and I've worn it a couple of times. Like the back of it says like up, down, left, right, BA start, Waypoint. It's like, if you know Waypoint, you know that it's like not.
It's a cousin of like the E3 merch. It's like in the ballpark.
Yes, it's very E3 merchy. It is very
I get it.
E3 merchy. And that was, I wear it ironically, proudly.
Okay.
And every member of the team also got a copy of that. It was like, just look, if you're gonna make this weird thing, then please comp me one. Thank you.
So speaking of Nextlander, Vinny over there on the podcast, when he was talking about the news of Waypoint shutting down, he made some reference to like, yeah, there were some talks between Vice and Giant Bomb. Something.
Oh, did he disclose that publicly?
That's all he said. What does that mean? Can you shed any more light on what was going on there?
I don't know if I'm in a position to. That's maybe a story for another day. I would have to clear that one. I can echo what Vinny said, was that at some point there were formal discussions between Vice and Giant Bomb about something, like what shape that would have taken, what that would have been.
Is this very early on, or what phase of Vice is
like halfway through?
Interesting.
So like 4 years ago. I'm trying to remember what PAX is. I remember people going to meetings on.
That's such a weird spot for you though, because it's like, the corporate frustrations Giant Bomb had. Then you go to Vice and you're experiencing some of those corporate frustrations, but
it was pre Waypoint Plus. So
okay.
That is like, so to, like, if we've been around for 7 years, like it was back sometime in the middle. Because we had enough of a travel budget to be going to things like PAX and things like that. Yeah, like I just frankly, like I wasn't
sure.
Vinny was in those conversations. I wasn't. Those were higher level than me. And so speaking to what I obviously was in the loop on what those conversations were, but one day, if you can get, I would just tell you to get Austin and Vinny on a podcast, and maybe they can tell you more.
Austin and Vinny, okay, interesting. Those two guys, of course. You had a tweet, and I was digging through trying to find it, to the point that I'm like, I think it was you. You had one of those tweets that talk about having a silent impact, but it was maybe like 2015, and I was back.
I might have purged. I deleted a bunch of my tweets at some point.
Okay, maybe it's in that batch. I don't.
I've been on long enough. I was like, I've grown since whenever I registered a Twitter account and took it seriously as a brand exercise.
Smart.
And at some point, I just purged a certain. I think I backed it up and then just like.
Sure.
I mean, I backed it up. Like, am I gonna? Hey, Jessica, you want to sit down and read your father's tweets from like 2011? Like, am I gonna be doing that? Why would I even back it up?
There's just a beautiful amount of ego in there though. Like, when I write my memoirs, this is gonna come back into play. I know that's how you're thinking about it, right?
I guess.
That's all right. That's fine.
Yeah. So it's possible that you can't find it because they don't go.
Okay.
I might have deleted everything pre-Waypoint.
Well, then let me.
It was like pre-Waypoint. Yeah. I had like a better sense of like where my politics were and how I wanted to present myself. And so it's possible that like I felt like more the version of the person I am today as a result of the Waypoint era. And so it's very possible you can't find it because it doesn't exist.
Well, let me recite to you your most controversial tweet then. It goes a little something like
hit me.
No, it's not. But it was like 2015.
The Lost ending is great, actually. Shut up.
No, but it's an obvious thing. And it was even obvious at the time. You just kept tweeting the most obvious, boring stuff. No, but it's one of those like, I know this, but just seeing somebody like you who I respect a lot, putting it out there on Twitter, it's like, okay, this is very good. It was like 2015 or so, and you just tweeted out like, hey, games media, here's your existential question for the future. Publishers are shutting off your access. What does your content look like after all access is shut off? And, especially being in like the heart of Game Informer at that time, which Game Informer relies a bit.
Access.
There's a lot of access dependency going on there. And it was just that feeling of like, okay, I know this is the future. I know things are going this way. I know publishers are writing their own blogs, doing their own interviews and stuff like that. And it was just that slight kick in the heart for like, this isn't lasting forever, everybody. You got to have some sort of plan B. And I mean, that's around the same time then I guess like Tim Turry and I, who's now at PlayStation, like, started co-hosting the Game Informer Show podcast, and like that ended up being the key to MinnMax and everything here. So thank you for that, I guess, is just reminding me that like, just constantly knocking on the door of publishers and hoping for their good graces of letting us get the word out, it's not sustainable forever.
No, I think, I attribute a lot of my philosophy on that to like Stephen Totilo, the ex-editor of Kotaku and now editor of the very good Axios gaming newsletter, in which Kotaku kind of made this philosophical shift to part because like they were doing enough reporting that they were getting blacklisted or not as much early access to things. Like, okay, let's stop treating games as like they end when they're released and like let's start treating them as all games are a service to some degree because the players are out there doing things with it afterwards. And when I worked there post Giant Bomb, it was I was assigned beats, you know, and like I was doing like a lot of Soul stuff and Spelunky and things like that. And that to me was also a kind of shift in how I think about games, and informed that, because, you know, if you're going to run one of these independent publications, if you're going to be kind of on your own, like you might be running. So if it Waypoint, like Vice views this as, you know, if we're running a successful business, but it's not enough to be important to the company, right? Like you can run a successful independent business where you can pay your bills, but you might not be important enough for publishers to care about you that much, right?
Yep.
And so that's a different complication. So then you have to think about, well, how do we produce content that is both interesting and meaningful and does not rely on the fact that I'm going to get Tears of the Kingdom 2 weeks early, and like have the review that kind of like runs along that. I mean, I think it is still useful to access is still useful for post-release content because you become more familiar with the things, so you can kind of hit the ground running. But I, you know, I mean, frankly speaking, you know, I'm already running into some of that where, you know, I've for crossplay, the parenting newsletter that I'm doing, you know, I've written a bunch of stories that are launching alongside that, and that's the content is sort of locked. It's in the CMS. It's ready to go. And now I'm starting to think about like, what is the stuff after that? What are the stories that I'm doing in the weeks to come? And it's like, you know, like on my Vice email, I had 2K reaching out about was it Lego 2K? What's that game
Lego
called?
2K Drive. Terrible name.
Lego 2K Drive. Yeah, there's sort of like open world kind of Forza Lego game, which is quite good. And very, very cool. I've enjoyed the couple hours I've spent with it. But like, you know, they've reached out multiple times for like, do you want to fly to this event? No, because we don't really do stuff like that. Do you want the game early? You want a preview? Blah, blah, blah. And I pulled up like the most recent email chain on that and was like, and did the pitch of like, hey, doing this parenting newsletter, like would love to specifically talk to somebody about what is it like to make a game that you know is going to be played by kids? How does that influence design? What sort of focus testing do you do specifically to that? You know, I want to kind of unpack that. And well, we don't have any spokespeople available at the moment. It's like, oh,
come on.
You
Yeah,
do.
Right.
But that, okay. And you know, part of that's like, I got to launch it, prove out that like, it's a thing, but asking people, do you want to be interviewed for my Substack?
Right.
Is like different.
Yep.
Like the Vice, even as small as kind of Waypoint, I felt like had a larger cultural imprint than it did a like literal internet imprint. Like our audience was not that large, like relatively speaking, but it like, you know, I felt like Waypoint at its best was able to speak broadly, have an influence more broadly, even if the audience itself was not that big. But like the name, like the word Vice, like went a long way.
Totally,
you know what I mean?
totally.
Like, and that's what PR people have to like. I'm not even knocking this PR person necessarily. Like they have to go to someone else and justify a request, which is like, okay, Patrick Klepek, we know him. Yes, like we've worked with him a long time, so that's like gets me a certain out in like a power meter.
Yep.
But then it's like, ooh, Substack. Well, that's not filling anything. And it's like, whereas like Vice, like that probably gets me across the finish line
right
on a request because some superior of theirs can go, oh sure, yeah, Vice, like they're popular or relevant.
So how much does that bug you? I mean, does that fill you up with a feeling of like, so I need to build something that will retain some level of oomph, or at this point you're just realizing like, hey, you know what, maybe that level of access I don't need. I can go with the indie route. I can find other people.
I don't like, you know, I think I like, you know, I think I get halfway there through like legacy contacts and just sort of like people understanding like the work I'm doing and the relationships I have, like can get me in the door on a number of things. It's like, you know, like if I want to talk to Tim Schafer, like I can DM Tim Schafer, you know what I mean? And like, and if then Tim asks somebody to set up an interview with me, that is like a faster route to that than me asking somebody like, you know, to go through a formal route. It's like, you know, there are things that I can do in that regard, but no, I think it's in the same way that, you know, in a MinnMax, it's like, you're going to get some access and you're not going to get some access. And it's like, take the access you do get and then build ideas around the things that you can't do. And like, that is going to push you ultimately in a direction that is more fruitful and interesting, because it's better to build things around ideas that you can capitalize on and get people interested in that than relying on that access part. And so, you know, I think I'll get a mixture of that and they'll, you know, we'll see where it all lands when it kind of launches and I have numbers to point to and things like that. But it does feel weird. I mean, you know, a small thing was, you know, we're going to summer. Are you going to Summer Games Fest?
No, I decided to have a kid instead. Yeah.
So that you're right in that window where you can't do stuff like that. And So I went registered as Waypoint, and then I get laid off, or like I'm informed that my position is being terminated. And my finals day is June 2nd. Summer Games Fest is the week after.
So weird.
And the very kind folks there, the folks running that were like, "Hey, you're still invited. Like, tell us what you want to be registered under." And I'm registered under freelance for now, even though that technically, I was like, I'm not gonna I'll just stay registered under freelance, and then I'll just tell people when I'm there the other things that I'm doing. I'm not gonna change 3 times in a database over the course of a month. But it was like a small one was like I don't even know how to pronounce the end of this game. Immortals of
Avium.
Yeah.
It's
really cool.
Yeah, it looks so cool. It's the Lego 2K Drive syndrome again. Of like, the game seems promising. It seems cool, but God, they need another crack at that name. Just anything else.
Yeah, I'm never gonna be able to pronounce that correctly. I'm sorry. Hopefully, every time I turn the game on, eventually it'll say Immortals of Avium. It's just like Resident Evil, so I can internalize what it's called. But just like the hierarchy of things where people are picking. Once I'm now registered, they're under freelance. It's like I got an email from somebody, but like the Sims team is doing something. If you'd like to come by for that, and then under there are bullet points about all the other stuff they're doing. And I was like, oh, I'd love to come see, Immortals. And they're like, oh, we'll let the team know. Okay.
That's tough.
But that's fine.
You'll get there.
That's fine. I'm PR people have different goals, aspirations. They are under different tensions.
Absolutely.
Than being nice to Patrick Klepek, letting them see and play their game. But it is just to underscore how quickly the sands sort of shift based on where you are and the where the publication is seen in the eyes of the companies and how they think and judge access. And actually one of the funnier ones of these, the last story that comes to mind in the spirit of this is I have been sweating for probably a year having to write a review of Tears of the Kingdom because one of the all-time great things that were published at Waypoint was Austin Walker's review of Breath of the Wild. It is a tremendous piece of criticism. It is constantly cited as one of people's favorite works on the site. It's if you're making a list of 10 things that Waypoint did, that's going to be on that list. Austin doesn't write for the website anymore. Ideally, Austin would have written the review of Tears of the Kingdom, not an option. And that game falls most closely in sort of my wheelhouse of things to play and write. And I have just for a year, bro, you really going to write the follow-up to that piece? What are you going to write? And we got into the review window for Tears of the Kingdom, and working with Nintendo is its own, they're a mysterious box. But I know the PR person that is assigned to us pretty well. I texted them. I was like, could you let me know? Get it early, getting a day of. And they're like, oh, you're getting a day of. And I was like, oh, thank God. I don't have to write a review. Off the hook. Just don't even have to write that piece. Just, Austin's article can stay there, and I don't ever have to write some really thought-provoking but ultimately disappointing follow-up criticism piece to that Breath of the Wild review. So that is an instance where the lack of access saved my ass.
What a weird way of looking at it. I'm sure you get this a lot, but games media, let's say you've been around for so long, so let's just say 10 years. 2033, what does games media look like?
10 years from now. It's probably part of what I wonder. I think a lot of it is, in some level, it's a lot of what it is right now, in the personalities working with audiences to create the content they want to make. The thing that I don't know what it looks like is on the some more traditionalist media level. What is it? The Washington Post, having launcher and then shuttering it almost as soon as it had opened it is a bad sign for these kind of legacy publications that should, I think, have a obligation to be covering one of the most important cultural touchstones in media right now, which is video games. And to be ignoring that is to be ignoring a lot of culture is politics, politics is culture, and if you're covering what society is about and not writing about video games and observing that as a medium, you're doing a disservice to your audience, and it's doing a disservice to the medium, frankly. And so I just don't know what that looks like in 10 years, because if you asked me 10 years ago, I thought where we'd be is like having things like Launcher. New York Times would have its own like gaming vertical and be taking that really seriously. That just seemed like a natural escalation for a lot of those publications. And I mean, things will inevitably get better in the sense that we are just in a horrible arc of like the media right now. Like the ad business is weird. AI is like, I don't know what ultimate impact it's going to have, but it's going to have short-term impact because it's going to be used as a cudgel by media companies to not employ as many people as possible. But in like the medium term, I do expect like some of those jobs to come back just because budgets will change and games are not going anywhere. And so inevitably there is always a cycle of person comes in and goes, those video games are pretty big, you guys.
Right.
Should be covering them. And so like some of that stuff will inevitably come back. But you know, I worry about what are the paths for people to get into this, you know, especially if like you're into writing. Like the path going forward is probably like it's podcasting, it's video, and there's writing involved, right? Like if you're doing like video essays, things like that, there's so much writing, but it's a different style of writing, it's a different kind of writing. But it's hard not to look dispiritingly at the future in which there's already been sort of a land grab for personalities and like influence, and like how much can you squeeze, use lack of a better, you know, it's a really cynical term, how much can you squeeze out of an audience in order to try and pay your bills? And like I think the golden age of that is kind of over, right? Like that's part of my underlying worry of like converting that ourselves is, do you want to watch another white guy talk about video games and pay for the right to do it? It's like there's a lot, this is, you know, no offense to my fellow people, but like there's a lot of us. And like at some point there's less of that to go around. And so, you know, how do younger creatives, writers, more diverse audiences find their path through where they can accrue enough popularity to then have an audience that does want to pay? I don't know. That's where I worry, is like, how are these new voices getting into the system? Like, how are these new voices, like there's a lot of good criticism and things like happening, that there are publications like Unwinnable that are doing that work, but there's being Unwinnable and then there's being in front of like, I want those voices also on the biggest possible stages. Like I'm glad that places like Unwinnable exist and that like we like marginalized folks have places where they can be paid and work on those tools and write. But I want those voices like having seats at the table as well. And that's something we tried to do with Waypoint, and like our freelance budget was trying to have names you hadn't heard of before, and try and get those people in, because once you're published and have bylines, it makes it easier to get published and have bylines at other places. It's like why we hired Renata Price. It's why we hired Ricardo Contreras. It's like trying to incorporate those sorts of voices like into our own work. And I just fear that is a difficult proposition going forward for a lot of people. I just think there's gonna be less jobs in general. Like that, like it's hard for me to see a world where more jobs. It's easy for me to see a world where less jobs. And so that's upsetting.
Yeah. So personally, you're marching into that future, but your head's on a swivel. that's where we're at right now.
I think so. Cause I just, at some point, it's like, you know, again, I got 2 kids, I got obligations to help them pay for college and things like that. It's like at some point, maybe I get squeezed out myself. And that's fine. Maybe then me leaving opens up a seat for somebody else. And that's exciting. And that's, you know, in some ways what happened with, like I left Giant Bomb and then Austin Walker took my spot. You know, I didn't hire Austin, but like Austin came along and like got, you know, that like, you know, whether it's, you know, you feel like it should be necessary or not, like I got a lot of public legitimacy by like getting in there and like doing that work and like sharing that place. Like he gets the Waypoint job, you know, the EIC thing from Vice out of Giant Bomb. And like all that stuff is funny because like him and I both interviewed for the Vice EIC position. And I took the call knowing that I didn't want it because one, I didn't want to move to New York. I just moved back to Illinois from California, and like it's like this is where I want to buy a house and have kids, and I don't. But it's like, ooh, the first time someone's called me and been like, "Do you want to be an editor in chief?" It's like,
That's
I want to
sweet.
do that call.
Yeah,
Well,
hell yeah.
I want to have someone tell me that was nice and pleasant, and we'll have a follow up conversation, and then I'm gonna say no. And so like I did the first interview, and it went really well. And then it was clear like things were going to progress to some next stage where it's like a smaller group of people. And I did not know this at the time, but the conclusion of that call was me there when I said like I'm not interested. And they said, well, do you have any other names we should talk to? I was, well, I think you should talk to Austin Walker. And they already were like
Smart.
Austin did in no world. I want to suggest that Austin got any of that because of me.
Sure.
But they were like, so I was like, oh, he'd be such a good choice. It's so interesting. And yeah, it'd be such a great splash and say so much about what you want to do with the website. Because then Austin and I had a meeting when he got hired at Giant Bomb, and we were at PAX together not long afterward. And I was like, hey, can we get dinner? I didn't know Austin very well. We were like Twitter mutuals, and that was about it. I was like, this is a weird website. Like, we should have dinner, and like, can I explain to you what it's like to have been there and then left, and just a little bit of what you're in for. Less about the people you're working with, as much as like being on a stage like that and working in the community and because I had ups and downs to the community with the kind of things I like to talk about. And I was like, you seem like someone who's going to talk about those things too, and here's how they're going to treat you potentially, and I'm not black, and like that seems like another complicating factor. We came out of that meeting going, gosh, it'd be really fun to work together. And he went off and did that work at Giant Bomb, and then ended up, calling me when he had an available hire for Vice. Like, well, maybe we should make good on that dinner. And it has been the pleasure of my lifetime to have had a chance to work with Austin. He's a dear friend of mine, and to have a chance to build something alongside him is something I was incredibly proud of. I'm very proud of what we did. I remember when I came to New York, like I was expecting my first child about a month after I got hired, and they wanted me to come to New York for like 3 weeks. And I talked to my wife, and I was like, I'm in the window you're in, where it's like travel for 3 weeks.
Yeah, no way.
I know it's only an hour flight from New York, an hour and a half from New York to Chicago, but I was like, I can't. I was like, you get me for 5 days. Like my wife, we negotiated to 5 days with the understanding that I could fly back at any time if she felt like anything was up. And so Austin and I have that week, and we walk out, and he's like, so what do you think? And I was like, I think you and I are going to have a lot of fun. And I think we're lucky if we get 2 years, but it'll be a really interesting 2 years.
Yeah.
And I think we'll do something cool. And we got almost 7 years out of it. And I think we did a lot of cool things. And that's more than we ever could have asked for. I think as rough as it was sometimes, I'm incredibly proud of what we did in that time.
Yeah, you're like the Mars rovers. Only supposed to last so long, but they just kept going, man. They were up there for so damn long.
I mean, being a media company for almost 7 years is a tiny miracle in and of itself. Yeah. Like we dodged a lot of probably justified layoff axes. If I'm speaking from the executive's point of view, not from my point of view. And we came out on the other side of it. I don't think like losing our soul in the process, and that in and of itself, I think is something to be proud of, and it's something we were able to do ourselves, and something we were able to do because of the audience. And that is something that I consider part of the legacy of Waypoint, and something that'll always put a smile on my face when I think about it.
Yeah, Hardee's doesn't own your soul, and you can take that to the grave, man.
Look, man, Hardee's, come back, come back.
Take the soul.
They brought a person in a Hardee's suit, and like they were dancing. I was like, it does not compromise my integrity to have the Hardee's man here. Like, you know how much money they're underwriting for this thing? Underwrite some other stuff for me, Hardee's.
You want to give a shout out to folks at the Waypoint that are going to be looking for other jobs? Just run down the crew, and I don't know. You probably have a better sense of what.
I can remember our exit on every podcast. You can follow Renata Price at Ren or Raven. Ren, is someone who's a really interesting game critic that has very distinct ambitions to get into a game. She's definitely someone who follows in the mold of an Austin Walker, and so hopefully I'll be fortunate enough to continue doing things with her in the future. But I, much like when I worked with Austin, I was like, oh, you are going to go above and I'm like here. And like, that's good. I'm not saying it's bad, but like, oh, you're like over there. And it's like, Red is very young, but he strikes me as someone that, could be on a similar trajectory. And so to have been able to do criticism and journalistic work with her in the time that I have is something I'm very thankful for, but seems like someone who will be shooting for the moon and potentially other directions. A_Cato_appears. Ricardo Contreras, our excellent longtime podcast producer and producer extraordinaire. Ricardo and Ren are actually both people where we sort of plucked people from the community that were Waypoint fans, but also like understood what we were trying to do and managed to get kind of integrated into what we actually did do. And like that is a really cool thing when you're able to attract like people of that talent and to make them part of the thing that they became a fan of in the first place. Like that is a neat thing that we've been able to do over time. And so, I'm sure, if I'm lucky enough to talk about Chicago Bears with Rob Zachney in the future, that Ricardo Contreras will be, fortunately or unfortunately, forced to edit those podcasts. Rob Zachney, who's at Rob Zachney on Twitter, someone that I have become incredibly close friends with during these 7 years. They started a little after me. I think they've been there for maybe 5.5 or something like that. But someone who we are wildly, if you listen to our work, wildly different people, and yet that is like a huge part of why we are incredibly close friends and colleagues. And I just don't. It is hard to imagine a future of mine that does not involve, in some way, being on a microphone with him. I mean, part of the whole reason we started the sports stuff was we just keep doing this in DMs. Do you want to just do it on a microphone? And that's what we did. And it's been a lot of fun and very successful. And, hopefully there'll be a space for things like that in the future. And then me, it's at Patrick Klepek. You can follow all my musings until, maybe I purge them and then you can't find them. Although I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can do the mass purge anymore because those are connected to the API systems that are all
interesting,
locked up now. So yeah, don't get canceled because then it's just gonna permanently be there unless you want to manually go through and delete them. The thing I can say is that on Friday, June 2nd, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be launching this kind of initiative that I've got going called Crossplay over at crossplay.news. So if you're a parent or impending parent or know someone who's a parent that would like to read observations and reports about, again, like this intersection of parenting and video games. The big initial piece I have over there is about like what happens when Roblox comes into the home. And I think Roblox is normally thought of as something that is played by like kind of teens or like older kids, like closer to 10. And that's just not true, especially when those older kids influence the younger kids. And all of a sudden you have a 5-year-old that's playing Roblox. And you're like, oh boy, this seems insidious and exploitative. And so it is use, a lot of what I'm trying to do over Crossplay is like things that are happening in my own life and then going out and doing reporting, but talking to experts and talking to other parents about how are they, dealing with like what happens when, your kids are on Roblox and suddenly there's a chat window. Like, what are we doing when microtransactions are finally in their life? Like, how do you handle what your kids can and cannot buy? And so the first big reported piece is kind of breaking down what happens when Roblox comes into the home. And then that is kind of a framework for a lot of the other pieces I want to do in the future. So
what happens when what happens when your kid wants to go to a gaming convention? How do you escort them in a polite way, but give them their space when they're meeting up with people online?
I am not far from those being the sort of things that, I'll be considering because, my oldest is turning 7 soon and like is now getting formal sort of interests in things, right? You spend a lot of those early years kind of jump between things. And then once you start to hit 6, 7, 8, it's like they start liking things and start getting good at certain interests. Like things start crystallizing in a certain way. And so, that's one of those things where, I will need people's support on that. Like nobody is funding that, there's no advertising. It is all people want to show up. And if that's something they want to pay for, I'm asking for your support and interest. And if it's not there, then I'll probably do it for about 3 months and we'll see what else is going on.
Makes sense. Okay. So the message is, if you love Waypoint, stay tuned. but don't have the highest of high expectations. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think it's a is kind of where we're at right now. And we also want to give people space to, like I said, if people don't want to keep doing Waypoint, they should have the space to do something else. And so we're trying to figure out what exactly that is. And I would say that you will have clarity before the end of the week.
Sweet. Awesome. Patrick Klepek, thank you so much. Appreciate it, man.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for watching or listening to this interview. There are a ton more like it in our playlist here on MinnMax's YouTube channel. If you enjoy this type of content, you can do a little thing. Just hit subscribe. That helps us in a big way. Or you can help support it directly over there on Patreon. But just check out that playlist on YouTube. There's a ton more like it. So cool. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody. If you thought, hey, this video wasn't bad, well, there's a whole lot more like it on MinnMax's YouTube channel. Please help us out by subscribing to our channel and checking out the MinnMax Show podcast, also available on your favorite podcast app, the best, most thorough discussion about games on the internet with the deepest dive, our monthly community trivia show with prizes called Trivia Tower, and a whole lot more. Thanks so much for your support, everybody. All you gotta do is click that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it.